From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Everyone's an economic populist now, but will the economy suffer because of it? That's the political story of the week, as Donald Trump and Kamala Harris compete for votes in the swing states of Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. Joe Biden looks set to block Nippon Steel's proposed takeover of U.S. Steel after Kamala Harris comes out against it. J.D. Vance and Donald Trump are already opposed. Plus, Kamala Harris proposes a nearly 40% increase in the tax on capital gains, but is hailed as an economic moderate for the increase. We'll break down her latest tax plan and how it compares to Donald Trump's. Welcome. I'm Paul Gigot. We're here on Potomac Watch, the daily podcast of the Wall Street Journal opinion pages, and I'm here with my colleagues Bill McGurn and Alicia Finley. Welcome to you both. Let's first talk about Kamala Harris's economic proposal, which was much ballyhooed, really given an awful lot of promotion by the campaign, so they want people to pay attention to it. And she's almost pitching it as a tax cut, believe it or not. Let's listen to her describe it.
And while we ensure that the wealthy and big corporations pay their fair share, we will tax capital gains at a rate that rewards investment in America's innovators, founders, and small businesses. So here's the detail. If you earn $1 million a year or more, the tax rate on your long-term capital gains will be 28% under my plan, because we know when the government encourages investment, it leads to broad-based economic growth and it creates jobs, which makes our economy stronger.
Kamala Harris, supply sider, who knew? The lower tax rates on investment income encourage economic growth. Arthur Laffer couldn't have said it better, Alicia, but is that really what she's proposing?
Well, first of all, the 28% is misleading because it doesn't include the 5% surcharge that she would impose. Actually, she would raise the current 3.7% one that the Obamacare actually enacted on investment income and raise it to 5%. So it'd actually be more like 33%.
That would be the top
rate over 1 million. And again, that would be equivalent to a 38% increase in the top marginal rate. And then in states like California and New York, you're close to 50%.
So the current rate, just so current rate's 20% plus 3.8, but I think it is surcharge. So it's 23.8. She is proposing to increase the base rate to 28 plus the surcharge of 5 to get to 33. It's a huge tax increase.
And as you said, she's marketing it as a tax cut, essentially, because it's lower than Biden's proposal, which would have increased the capital gains rate to actually the regular income rate, which was 39.6%, then added on another 5% on top of that to 44.6%. And I think she's been hearing from some of her donors, Reid Hoffman namely, that this would just be devastating for the economy and would reduce investment and probably actually wouldn't result in any revenue gains.
Reid Hoffman being the Netflix CEO and one of her big corporate backers. Silicon Valley types, of course, get paid in capital gains when they invest in a company and then sell it or cash their shares out. The other thing to do, Bill, is put this into some historical context. Her rate, let's say she would succeed in going up to 33% for capital gains. That would actually be the highest rate since the late 1970s, believe it or not, when in 1978, Congress cut the capital gains rate to 28%. That was a so-called Steiger Amendment, the beginning of the supply side revolution. And it stayed below that. And she'd raise it back up to those heights. So you almost have to just admire the political spin here of suggesting that she's now the candidate of entrepreneurs, though you don't have to admire the press corps for buying it.
Right. Look, it points to what the Democrats believe is the fair share by the wealthy and corporations. The answer is always the same: more. Whatever it is now, it has to be more. I was really surprised. You and Alicia were very unfair to Kamala Harris for saying that this was an incentive for investment. And you just dismissed that out of hand. I think it was an incentive for investment, but just she didn't point out in Ireland, not in the U.S., for companies to go abroad and invest in these other countries. So just because she didn't specify doesn't mean it won't be good for investment. But the larger political point is I think Democrats in general feel it's always easy to attack corporations and present it as a populist thing, even though the experience suggests that workers are really punched by this, and not to mention first jobs as headquarters go overseas, but also they end up paying the tax. That's who pays it. And so when they say they're not raising taxes on anyone under X amount of income, I think Kamala Harris has put it at $400,000. Well, it's going to be raised on these workers.
All right. We're going to take a break. And when we come back, we'll talk more about the competing tax plans, as well as the competition to see who can keep out Japanese investment into the United States when we come back. Welcome back. I'm Paul Gigot with the Potomac Watch podcast, our daily podcast for the Wall Street Journal. And I'm here with Alicia Finley and Bill McGurn. There's an element of the Harris tax proposal on capital gains which she doesn't mention, but it appears that she is endorsing the Biden proposal to tax unrealized capital gains, Alicia. Now, unrealized gains means the increase in an asset value. You'd pay a tax on that, whether or not you actually realized that gain in a transaction. That is, you sold a stock, you sold your home, you sold your Picasso, and you get the increase in value of your Picasso. Then you pay a tax on that. That's a capital gain, but it's realized. You got the cash. You get the money in your pocket. And an unrealized gain, if the value of your shares in NVIDIA, say, go up 25%, you would pay a tax on that increase. You might not have the cash for that, so you might have to sell some of the NVIDIA shares or something else. Now, let's listen to Ro Khanna, who's a congressman from California, Democrat, talk about the wisdom of that proposal.
Let me tell you why I don't think a blanket tax on unrealized gain is a good thing. I mean, let's say you're an entrepreneur. You create a company. It gets to 100 million or 200 million on paper. Now, if you're taxing that, you're probably going to force that person to sell it. They're probably going to sell it to private equity. Do you really want the entrepreneurs to be forced to sell their companies to larger institutions and to decline in value? I don't think that that's what you want.
Well, Ro Khanna speaking for his constituents out there in Silicon Valley, but it's a very powerful and correct argument, Alicia.
Right. And he's actually perhaps one of the most progressive members in Congress on a lot of economic issues. So the Biden proposal, he had wanted to impose a 25% tax on unrealized capital gains, as you said, on people earning $100 million. Harris, has not notably walked back on that. While she has said she won't ban fracking, she has not actually repudiated this. And some of her advisors are whispering to some donors saying, oh, she really doesn't believe that. And we're just putting that out there for, populist show. Mark Cuban came out, I think today or yesterday, saying that, well, she will not do this. I wouldn't be so sure. I did recall this idea during the Build Back, they were scrounging for money to pass Build Back Better in the debate in the autumn of 2021. And Wyden actually put this on the table and they were looking at it. And the only reason that they didn't go with it was because of opposition, besides its complexity, but also opposition from Manchin and Sinema, who will not be, by the way, be in the Senate come Harris's potential presidency. So I don't think there would necessarily be that kind of check.
Well, there's significant support for it in the Senate, for sure. Ron Wyden, who's now the chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, has proposed a version of this tax, and Elizabeth Warren also for it. So if they're out there looking for income, this form of you could call it a wealth tax, but it's a version of a wealth tax, but a tax on unrealized gains could be, in fact, something they look to as a cash cow. And once you put in a tax like that, do you think the threshold is going to stay at 100 million, Bill? I sure don't. I think they're coming after McGurn eventually.
Yes. I always think that, no matter who's there. But that's the problem. As I said, it was only half jesting that the Democratic answer is always more. They never stick to, what's a fair share, what's a rate, what's a threshold. It's always more. And what they're doing is looking for unpopular targets. Not many people's hearts bleed for corporations and so forth and wealthy individuals. So they go after them because there's the least political price for it. But I think it does great damage. And it's really demagoguery, just this rapacious tax machine, just looking. There's never any look at the consequences. For example, the consequences of the Trump tax cut and what it yielded is always about punishing big companies and wealthy individuals. And I don't see why they should be punished for what they're contributing to the economy.
That's the context for all of this, Alicia. We have this tax debate. The Trump 2017 tax cuts, or some of them, expire at the end of 2025. So whoever wins in Congress and then the White House will have a huge role in setting out American tax policy for the next several years. And in particular, the corporate rate does not rise. That's permanent. So that stays 21%, although Harris wants to raise it to 28, but that takes a statute. Now, these other individual tax rates do expire, and therefore there's enormous leverage on the part of members of Congress who want to raise rates to be able to use this expiration to raise them. Obama did that, remember, in late 2012, 2013, when we had the last expiration of a Republican tax cut. And now they're trying to do it again and kind of move the ratchet up even higher.
Right. And then Obama did that. They let the top rate increase back up to 39.6%, which it was there until Trump cut
This is on income tax.
Just on income tax, right. And then they did as we mentioned before, the net investment tax of 3.8% on top of for dividends and capital gains. Now, as you mentioned, there's going to be a ratcheting effect. It's not clear if some of this is going to actually be inflation adjusted brackets. I think one thing you also have to consider is Democrats going back, actually, if you Hillary Clinton and debating and Obama actually in 2008 said, she opposed raising it above 20%. Actually, Bill Clinton cut it from 28% to 20%.
Part of an agreement with Republicans.
Exactly. And so these have actually often been bipartisan compromises. You mentioned that there's going to be kind of a fiscal cliff, and it's going to depend a little bit on who's in control. If Republicans have control of one or both houses of Congress, I think you can expect a much bigger increase if Democrats control both chambers of commerce and Kamala Harris wins. But I think Republicans are going to have to, or probably going to be looking to give ground on some things. And I think part of the problem is when we were talking about populism is some of them want to fund an expansion of the child tax credit. And so they're going to also be looking for money to do that. And some of these ideas may actually resonate in this increasing populist faction of the GOP, like J.D. Vance.
Well, that is for sure. So I think the chances of a major tax increase in the end of 2025 going into 2026 are enormous. Bill, Donald Trump has a very different tax plan. He obviously is not want to raise tax rates. But the question becomes, can he make the case against Kamala Harris effectively? And I think Kamala Harris is going to come out. She's going to do in the debate more or less what we showed you in that clip, which is she's going to suggest that she's the candidate of small business. She's the candidate of entrepreneurial capitalism. She likes capitalism. I bet you'll say, I'm a capitalist. I like business. I bet you'll hear that about 10 times maybe 5 times in the debate, but you'll hear it when the tax debate comes up. Can Trump make the case?
Yeah, Joe Biden says exactly that, by the way. He always says, I'm a capitalist. I'm for people making money, a lot of money if they're successful. You would never know it by his actions. And the same with Kamala Harris. What's amazing to me on the corporate tax side, Trump has to defend his tax cuts. So I think he's pretty steady on that, the corporate tax part, because of his record and what it did. On the personal tax side, he's already offered the no tax on tips, and J.D. Vance is pushing the child care tax credit to counter them, to support the idea that they're for the working class. And these are gimmicks. I think he'd be a lot better off. He obviously doesn't think so. It seems to me these are all arguments for a flat tax. You want fairness, a flat tax. Much simpler. Paul, you and I live with the flat tax in Hong Kong, where we could do our taxes in about 15 minutes on, one page and so forth. And I think it would unleash a lot of productivity. But instead of going down that route, he's kind of muddying the waters by proposing all these gimmicks. And the problem, apart from the individual problems with child tax credits, is that the price of them will probably be other credits for other gimmicky things, just gunk up the code even further.
enormously expensive $1.6 trillion or so for the child tax credit increase to $3,600. Harris wants to move it up to $6,000 for the first year.